We're asked to express each of the following in the form 8 to the p. The first one, the root of x, is 8 to the half. That's something to be aware of when you do 8 to the 1 over n. Actually, let me generalize. X to the 1 over n, then it's actually the nth root of x. A little bit of evidence for the square roots. If I have x to the half times x to the half, then I would add the powers and I would get x. Similarly, if I had the square root of x and I times it by the square root of x, that the definition of when I times the square root by itself is that I get the number that's inside the square root. So it must be that these two are the same. Moving on, when you have 1 over something, well, first of all, we can write it as 1 over 8 squared. We need to relate that 64 to 8. And then when you have 1 over, it's the same as 8 to the minus of that power there. A little bit of evidence for that. So if you had, say, x to the minus 1 and you times it by x squared, then you would add the powers to give x to the 1. But if you had 1 over x times x squared, then x squared divided by x is also x. So I've got the same thing on the right, same thing here. It must be that these two are the same. And you can generalize it and say that x to the minus 2 is 1 over x squared and so on. I'm not going to do that here. Finally, we've got 2 to the 6 times 2 squared. We can use the first rule of indices to add the powers together to get 2 to the 8. Now we need to somehow relate 8 that to 8 to the p. There's two ways you could do it. I think the way that I want to do it is that I could write 8 to the p as 2 to the 3 to the p. So that is equal to 2 to the 3p. So now I can set 2 to the 8 equal to 2 to the 3p, and it must be that 3p is equal to 8 because I've got the same base. It must be that the powers are the same, and therefore p is equal to 8 over 3. And that means that this thing is just going to be 8 to the 8 over 3. That's one way of doing it. I felt like when I started it, that was going to be the easiest way, but maybe not. Another way you could do it is if you have 2 to the, what was it again? 2 to the 8, then you could recognize that 2 is the cube root of 8, and you can write that as 8 to the third. I don't know, that just felt a little bit less obvious than writing 8 as 2 to the 3, but they're equivalent. And then we get the answer really quickly. So yeah, arguably this method is slightly better, but either way, the answer is 8 to the power of 8 over 3.